right, so ready for your deep dive today. We're going to tackle something you guys specifically wanted us to explore.
Okay.
How to think faster in English so you can, unlock more confident and fluent speaking.
Ooh, interesting.
And you gave us a great place to start.
Yeah.
Episode called Think Fast, Speak Smart from the Learning English podcast.
I love it. Yeah, so
And
let's dive in.
it's not just about cramming in more vocab or like grammar rules.
Yeah.
Which is what's so interesting about this episode.
Yeah.
It's about actually rewiring your brain to think in English.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, why is thinking in English so important? I get that translation can slow you down,
Right.
but is it really that big of a deal?
It really is.
Okay.
Think about it this way. Every time you translate in your head,
Yeah.
your brain is doing this mental gymnastics routine,
Oh, wow.
jumping back and forth between languages.
Yeah.
And that's something called cognitive load. And it takes up precious brain power that you could be using to, actually hold a conversation.
So it's like our brain is trying to run a marathon while simultaneously solving a Rubik's Cube.
Exactly.
No wonder we get tongue-tied.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you think directly in English, you just free up all that mental energy,
Yeah.
making you a much faster, smoother speaker.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do we escape this translation trap?
Right.
The podcast hosts, Alex and Sophia, talk about starting small,
Okay.
naming everyday objects in English, changing your phone's language settings, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is that really all it takes?
Those little changes might seem insignificant, but they're like laying the first bricks in a pathway.
Yeah.
You're essentially building new connections in your brain,
Yeah.
making English feel less and less foreign over time.
So I love how the podcast emphasizes that making mistakes is totally fine.
Yes.
In fact, they encourage it.
Absolutely. That's so important. So many language learners get stuck in this perfectionism loop,
Yeah.
and it totally paralyzes them.
But fluency isn't about flawlessly conjugating every verb.
Right.
It's about communicating your ideas effectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the podcast gives a bunch of exercises to help train your brain to think in English.
Mm-hmm.
There's the English self-talk, where you just describe your day in English.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the mental diary, which is like journaling, but all in your head.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Both of those tap into something called active recall.
Okay.
You're actively pulling information from your memory
Yeah.
instead of passively consuming it.
Right.
And when you do that consistently, you strengthen the neural pathways
Okay.
associated with English, making it easier to think in the language.
Yeah, and there's that conversation simulation, which sounds pretty interesting.
Yes.
It's basically holding imaginary conversations in your head,
I love that.
like a mental dress rehearsal for real-life interactions.
Think of it as giving your brain a workout in the gym of English conversation.
Oh, I like that.
You're prepping yourself to think and respond more quickly on the spot.
Okay, I have to admit some of these exercises sound a bit out there,
Yeah.
but the podcast also includes some more familiar advice.
Okay.
Like recording yourself speaking English.
Right.
Isn't that a classic language learning tip?
It is. It's a classic for a reason.
Hmm.
It helps you pinpoint areas
Yeah.
where you stumble or hesitate,
Right.
so you can smooth those out over time.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, hearing yourself speak English can be a real confidence booster
Yeah.
as you notice your progress.
There's also a timed challenge where you pick a topic and you just talk about it in English until the timer goes off.
Oh, nice.
I imagine that's like a mini immersion experience.
Totally.
Forcing you to think on your feet.
Exactly. It's like doing interval training for your brain.
Yeah.
These short bursts of intense English thinking can really accelerate your progress.
Now, one thing that stood out to me was when Alex and Sophia shared their personal stories.
Mm-hmm.
They actually talked about how using these techniques helped them overcome their own language barriers.
It makes them much more relatable, right? You suddenly realize that these aren't just theoretical concepts. They've actually helped real people achieve fluency.
So it's not just some academic theory cooked up in a lab.
Right.
It's battle-tested and proven effective.
Exactly.
That's pretty reassuring.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is what
Yeah.
they suggest for advanced learners.
Yeah.
Like, what if you're already comfortable thinking in English?
Okay.
How do you take it to the next level?
That's where things get really interesting.
Ooh, okay.
They propose challenges like engaging in spontaneous debates or discussions, which forces you to think critically and respond rapidly in English.
Ooh, that sounds
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're aiming for true mastery,
Right.
you need to be able to handle those complex conversations.
Absolutely. They also recommend summarizing complex ideas in a single English sentence.
Okay.
That's a great way to hone your ability to cut through the noise
Right.
and express your thoughts clearly and concisely.
It's like distilling an entire essay into a single powerful statement.
Eh.
I can see how that would be incredibly helpful for professionals
Mm-hmm.
who need to communicate complex information quickly. What other challenges do they mention?
Another one is brainstorming in English.
Okay.
You pick a topic you're passionate about,
Yeah.
set a timer, and just let your ideas flow, writing them all down in English.
Okay.
This helps build your fluency in retrieving and organizing vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
essentially giving your brain a workout in creative expression.
I love that. It's like a mental sprint for your English fluency.
Exactly.
It forces you to access those words and concepts quickly without overthinking it.
And they go even further with a real-time challenge for their listeners.
Okay.
They ask them to think about their dream vacation for 2 minutes, strictly in English,
Okay.
and then speak about it out loud for another minute.
Wow, that's putting people on the spot.
It is.
But I can see how it would be an incredibly effective way to solidify the learning process.
Totally.
It's like taking all those mental exercises and applying them in a real-world scenario.
It's about bridging the gap between passive learning and active application.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
You're not just absorbing information, you're actually using it.
Yeah, putting it into practice.
Exactly.
And I think that's a great point to transition into the next part of our discussion because
Okay.
they don't shy away from the fact that there will be bumps in the road.
Right.
They dedicate a good chunk of the episode to talking about common obstacles
Yeah.
people face when trying to think faster in English, and more importantly, how to overcome them.
Exactly.
So we'll dig into that after a quick break.
Sounds good. And they don't shy away from the fact that, like, you're going to hit some bumps in the road.
Yeah, for sure.
They dedicate a good chunk of the episode to talking about, those common obstacles
Right.
people face when trying to think faster in English.
Yeah.
And more importantly, like, how to actually overcome them.
Exactly. One of the biggest hurdles they address is anxiety.
Oh.
It's so common for language learners to get tripped up
Right.
by the fear of making mistakes.
Totally.
And they really drive home the message that perfection is not the goal. Communication is.
So true. I remember when I first started learning, a new language, I was so worried about getting everything grammatically perfect
Right.
that I barely spoke at all. It was like I was trapped in my own head, overanalyzing every word.
It's like you're so focused on avoiding potholes that you forget to actually enjoy the drive.
Yes, exactly.
And the irony is that the more you focus on perfection,
Right.
the less fluent you become.
It's true. They actually offer a really interesting solution for this.
Okay.
Creating an English-only zone.
Now that sounds intriguing. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so
What is that?
it's basically carving out a specific time each day where you commit to only consuming English content.
Okay.
So like reading, listening, talking to yourself in English, you name it.
So you're essentially immersing yourself in the language.
Yes.
Creating a mini English-speaking world for your brain to inhabit.
Exactly. And they emphasize that it doesn't have to be this huge chunk of time.
Right.
Even just like 15, 20 minutes a day
Yeah.
can make a difference.
That's actually quite manageable. I can see how that would gradually shift your brain
Yeah,
into that English thinking mode.
totally. But what about those moments when you get stuck, you hit a mental roadblock, and you just can't find the right word?
Yeah, they talk about that too.
Okay.
The key is to resist the urge to revert to your native language.
Right.
They say it's like hitting the reset button on all that hard work you've put in.
Exactly. Instead of giving in to that temptation, they encourage you to try and describe the word you're looking for, even if it means using simpler vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's like flexing your mental muscles
Yeah.
to find alternative routes to your destination.
That's such a good analogy.
Yeah.
It's like taking the scenic route instead of relying on the GPS.
Yes.
You might discover some hidden gems along the way.
Exactly. And in the process,
Yeah.
you're reinforcing those neural pathways,
Right.
making it more likely that the word will just pop up effortlessly next time.
That makes sense.
Okay.
They also bring in some expert advice
So nice.
from seasoned language coaches,
Okay.
which adds another layer of credibility
Yes.
to their recommendations.
What are some of the key takeaways from those experts?
One of the big things they emphasize is the importance of setting achievable goals.
Okay.
It's not about trying to cram in hours of study every day.
Right.
It's about consistency. Even just 5 minutes of dedicated English thinking can make a difference over time.
That's actually really encouraging.
Yeah.
It makes it feel much less overwhelming.
Right. You don't have to overhaul your entire life.
Right.
You can start small and gradually build from there.
They also stress the importance of surrounding yourself with English content.
Okay.
In all its forms, podcasts, videos, articles, books, the more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it will feel to think in English.
It's like creating an immersive English-speaking environment.
Yeah.
Even if you're not physically living in an English-speaking country.
And of course, they reiterate the importance of consistent practice, like working out a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about the why, the how, and the what ifs.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know what stands out to you
Okay.
as the most impactful takeaway from this deep dive.
For me, it's the emphasis on shifting your mindset away from translation and towards thinking directly in English.
Okay.
It's about rewiring your brain to see English not as a foreign code to be deciphered, but as a natural mode of expression.
I completely agree. It's like switching from a manual transmission to an automatic.
Yes.
It takes some getting used to at first.
Right.
But once you make that shift,
yeah,
it becomes second nature.
And what's really empowering is that they offer so many practical techniques to achieve this mental shift. Whether it's the English self-talk or the conversation simulation or those timed speaking challenges, there's something here for everyone, regardless of their learning style or experience level.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
It's about finding the tools and techniques that resonate with you.
Yes.
And incorporating them into your daily life.
And they don't just throw a bunch of exercises at you and wish you luck.
Right.
They acknowledge the challenges, they offer solutions, and they encourage you to celebrate those small victories along the way.
I think that's what makes this episode so effective. It feels realistic and achievable.
It does.
They're not promising overnight fluency.
Right.
They're offering a roadmap for sustainable progress.
Yeah.
Based on proven strategies and real-life experiences.
It's about embracing the journey, knowing that there will be bumps along the way, but that with persistence and the right approach, you can reach your destination.
And I think that's a really great point to segue into the next part of our conversation.
Okay.
Because we were talking about, staying motivated and celebrating those small victories.
Right.
And I think that kind of leads us into this idea of, how to keep that momentum going, how to make sure that you're staying engaged and excited about the process.
Totally.
Yeah.
We'll dive into all of that after a quick break.
Yeah, it's so refreshing to hear language learning advice.
Right.
That doesn't feel intimidating or overwhelming,
Yeah, totally.
It's not about becoming some kind of grammar guru overnight.
Right.
It's about, making small, consistent steps towards fluency.
I think that's a really important point to highlight. Like, this isn't about cramming your brain with information.
Right.
It's about training it to think in a new way, which takes time and effort.
Speaking of time and effort.
Yeah.
One thing I'm curious about is how to stay motivated throughout this process. There are bound to be moments when you hit a plateau or you feel like you're not making progress as quickly as you'd like.
Yeah.
How did the podcast address that?
They talked about the importance of celebrating those small victories along the way.
Okay.
It's easy to get caught up in the end goal of fluency.
Right.
And forget to acknowledge how far you've come.
So instead of focusing on what you haven't mastered yet, take a moment to appreciate the progress you've already made.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Give yourself a little pat on the back to keep that motivation going.
And they also emphasized the importance of finding ways to make the learning process enjoyable.
Absolutely.
If you're constantly forcing yourself to study in ways that feel tedious or boring, you're less likely to stick with it.
It's like anything else in life.
Yeah.
If you're not having fun, it's going to feel like a chore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So find ways to incorporate English into activities you already enjoy.
Yes.
If you love watching movies, watch them in English with subtitles.
Totally.
If you love reading, pick up an English novel. Just make it a natural part of your life.
And speaking of making it natural, remember that English-only zone we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. The dedicated time each day.
Yeah.
For immersing yourself in English content.
They actually took that a step further.
Okay.
And suggested creating a curiosity zone.
A curiosity zone. Now, I'm really intrigued. What is that exactly?
So it's all about cultivating a mindset of curiosity towards the language. It's about actively seeking out opportunities to challenge yourself, to explore new vocabulary, to dive deeper into the nuances of English.
So it's not just about passively consuming English content.
Right.
It's about engaging with it on a deeper level.
Exactly.
Asking questions.
Yes.
Exploring different perspectives. Constantly pushing the boundaries of your understanding.
It's about embracing the joy of learning.
Yeah.
And realizing that fluency isn't a destination, it's a lifelong journey of discovery.
I love that. It's like turning language learning into an adventure rather than a chore.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key message you hope our listener takes away from this conversation?
I hope they realize that thinking in English is not some unattainable superpower reserved for a select few.
Yeah.
It's a skill that can be developed with the right mindset, the right tools, and consistent effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And more importantly, I hope they feel empowered to start taking action today.
Yes.
Even if it's just incorporating one small change into their routine.
Every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to fluency.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of thinking in English.
Absolutely.
We hope you found it valuable and inspiring.
And if you're ever feeling lost or discouraged, just remember we're here to guide you.
Yeah.
Just let us know what other resources or deep dives you'd like us to explore with you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Until then, happy learning.
Happy learning.